Good afternoon, and welcome to the Imers.land roundtable discussion for the 30th of October, 2022. And today, what we're going to do is something a little bit. We've been collecting questions from members of the community and put them all together to kind of use that as jumping off point for today's discussion. So I am joined, as usual, by Gavin Smith, one of the other founders of Imers.land. Hi, Gavin.
Hi,
How are
Marcy.
you doing today?
Yep, great. I got the time right considering clocks have gone back. So fortunately, my dogs made sure
Yes,
I was fully aware of the time. So yeah,
that's right. And anybody watching in the Americas, clocks go back next week. But there's been a lot going on in the cryptocurrency market, not least of which, dare I say it, I don't want to jinx things, but the markets look like they might be moving in a slightly upward trajectory. Do you think, am I being overly optimistic?
so at the risk of sounding like a bit of a stuck record on this, our view in the hedge fund has been for our view of the year was that it was going to be a tough first half, and then as interest rates were raised, as the Fed raised rates, and then as the economy started to slow down towards the tail end of this year, we expected to see interest rate expectations start to fall and real assets start to rise. Real assets being gold, crypto, assets that appreciate in value linked to long-term inflation. That was our expectation. Now, that's been longer to turn around than we expected. It took longer for signs of a slowdown in the economy to emerge, and the Fed has been quite aggressive in its tightening. But what I think we're seeing towards the end of this year is the start of that perception moving into the market, the start of the perception that maybe the Fed are not going to hike as much as was expected, that perhaps they'll take their foot off the brake a bit, and therefore allow real assets to start to appreciate in value, because with the expectation that we'll have a negative real interest rate environment move in the not too distant future. I mean, that's my view, Marcy. What do you think of the situation?
When you say, I want you to clarify, when you say, are you saying that we are going to return to the negative interest rates that we have had previously? So,
Negative real interest rates. So real interest rates are interest rates minus inflation.
Minus
So,
inflation. Got it.
If you imagine if you're holding an asset and the cost of financing is less the inflation of that asset, then you may as well borrow money to buy it because it's growing more than your interest rate. So negative real interest rates, which don't necessarily mean negative interest rates, tend to be good for assets like commodities, assets like cryptocurrency, assets like property as well.
Well, you say that, but I don't know, for instance, in property, which is a retail market, and cryptocurrency, which is largely driven by a retail market as well. I don't think people are quite as logical as you suggest.
I think you're right, but I think when you get purchasing decisions, the way people will think is not have we got negative real interest rates? That means my cost of borrowing is cheaper. The way it actually manifests is somebody is sitting on $10,000 that they received as a bonus, or and they think, okay, I can put that on deposit for 4%, but actually inflation's 8%. So I'm going to be losing 4% on my money every year. Where else can I put it that's going to at least keep track with inflation? So that's how people think of the situation, and why they will tend to move their money into into property funds, into commodity funds, into crypto funds. If they're more on the professional side, if they're more retail, they're likely to look at whether they should put their money into certain equity funds or ETFs, commodity ETFs, that type of thing.
So, because I know what drives property decisions. So independent retail property decisions. You were speaking specifically in terms of property funds, REITs, because people in America are looking at property prices now, and a property, let's say you have a $500,000 house in one town and you're considering moving to another town, but you have, because of what they have in America, this peculiar situation where you can lock in an interest rate for 20 or 30 years, people are thinking, oh, I better sit here on this property because if I move across to one in another location, my interest rate will be
Hmm.
recalculated.
So, so if
And
you
that's a long-term
absolutely now,
loan.
if you think of the two the various levels of society that impacts, you've got the people who are at our end who are paying their mortgage, but it's tight. They have a job offer somewhere else, but it will increase their mortgage
Outgoings.
by, I don't know, $300. Yeah, been up in there. So they may then be constrained from selling their property. What they may choose to do is selling their property. They rent in the new location and they rent their property out. So that's a property that doesn't come on the market. The next level up, so someone who's, let's say, higher middle class, has a job offer, they may be in a similar situation. Besides, you know what? I've got enough reserves. I can rent my property out and I can get a new mortgage for the new property. And I'll just keep the first property as an investment, and I'll move to my new job and I'll buy a new property. So actually, the effect through the various levels will be it will remove property from the market at the start level because those properties will be rented instead of bought. Higher up, it will tend to start reducing the supply as people make those decisions, and it becomes cheaper to do in real terms if interest rates are lower than the inflation rate.
A question that came from a number of quarters, and you touched lightly upon it with the
Hang
start
on,
of your
you're not getting away that lightly. You haven't given your view of
one
Bitcoin
second.
for the end of the year.
Alexa, be quiet. Sorry about that. I think that well, there's this peculiarity. I understand the US property market much more than I understand what drives purchasing decisions in other jurisdictions. And I think that people listening to this podcast, while there is a large proportion of Americans, there are people in the English speaking world. I know we have people in Singapore, people in the UK, and certainly a lot of people in Australia who are listening to this, and I have no idea how it's structured there. But in America, because I understand that well, and I can speak with some authority about it, their decisions are driven more so by the fact that you are making a long-term decision. You have a long-term uh, commitment to an interest rate, but we perceive we're the I believe that the zeitgeist for an American is that we are forever optimistic, and we do not believe that this inflation rate will stay in place. We believe it is a short-term aberration that our government or our central bank will somehow manage to control, and that will feed into the decisions people make. So, yeah, all I can talk about is what I believe the drivers are. Now, you are much more familiar, and I'm quite interested. Do similar things drive the property market in the UK?
Property market in the UK for a number of years has been driven by the buy-to-let market. A lot of people have been buying property as investments to rent out. That has been turning around as interest rates have gone up. So you're seeing some of these buy-to-let landlords letting some of their properties go onto the market. Now we're still, I mean, I was very surprised that last month the index rose in value again. Historically, for the past few years, there's been a real shortage of property on the market because of this investment activity. So that's what's driven prices significantly higher. There still seems to be a mismatch between the number of buyers and number of sellers. More buyers coming in than properties available to purchase. So that's maintaining properties at a high level. Personally, and this is not our fund doesn't invest in property, so this isn't a fund view. This is just my personal view. I think UK property will undergo something of a setback. I think it's lagging other markets. It's continued to rise while equity markets have come under pressure. Commodities, all except gold and the commodities impacted by the Ukrainian situation, and cryptocurrency. Property has maintained its value pretty well. I think there will be some catch up as the supply and demand equalizes. I think UK property markets will probably come under some pressure in Q3. But like I said, that's more a personal view than any fund view.
Sure.
But I was actually getting at your view of the crypto market. What do you think the crypto market's going to do?
Oh, I have given up having a personal opinion about that, accepting that my decisions are a fantastic contraindicator. If I perceive that the market is going to rise, and I would say if because I count myself, I cannot keep myself from having a gut feel, and I do have a gut feel that the market is going to rise, but it has been my experience that this shows that the market is still going to come off. But if we could move
So we
ahead
should
to
feed your views into the models as a negative correlation.
as a negative correlation, yes, I think that might be wise. One of a question that we got from a number of different sources. So I'd like to answer some of the questions because I could talk to you about property. I've got some really strong opinions and things I've been thinking about the property market, but we really should answer some of the questions that people have posted. So this is how it is written, and so will Bitcoin ever recover in price, or is this the end of it as an asset, which is slightly different to what we've been talking about? And I'd like you to speak about that.
So I think Bitcoin as an asset class has established itself now. Throughout this, where this was different to the 2018 bear market, which has been similar in duration and time, but the characteristic was somewhat different. We told you it was a Ponzi scheme. We told you it was worthless, and they walked away from the industry. Banks were starting to get interested in 2017. They walked away during 2018. What's been different this time is there was a lot of enthusiasm, same as the market rallied it through 2020, 2021. As we entered the bear market and into 2022, banks have, if anything, institutions, let's not just say banks, institutions have, if anything, increased their activity in the crypto space. This week, I mean, you had Visa creating a number of trademarks and patent requests for wallet concepts that they have and products for the crypto marketplace. So that's a significant difference in institutional mindset from the last bear market. I think you're seeing far fewer pundits saying, yeah, it's going to go to zero this time. I think people accept it's a bear market. They accept it as a volatile asset class, but they also think its long-term future is is established, and I think that's true. I think it's the only thing that will replace Bitcoin is a replacement cryptocurrency or form of asset protection. So I think, because this technology, it may be surpassed, but I don't think it will. This asset class will cease to exist.
And I would like to render an opinion and have a follow-on question, which is also part of the mix. My opinion in alignment with yours. I've been watching, and companies like Visa, there's a lot of positioning going on in the institutional space, even through this bear market, with people establishing ETFs and all kinds of different ways of cutting up the asset and creating ways for institutional investors to get involved. We have touched upon this during other podcasts, but do you think that the advent of government-issued cryptocurrencies could kill off Bitcoin?
Actually, I don't think. Well, two completely different use cases. Back stable coins are designed to make, well, two use cases. Even there, there's two use cases. You've got the central bank tokens, which are designed for secure transactions between the central bank and the banking industry, and it's a convenient way to move those assets about. You then got the retail approach, whether those digital tokens move on to the retail space. Again, I think they serve a purpose. I think they could serve a very good purpose if they allowed individuals to hold their money, their cash, as an asset rather than a bank credit, which is what cash is. When you put money into $100 into a bank account, you no longer own $100. The bank owes you $100, and legally that's a big difference. Because if forget the federal guarantee, if the bank can't pay you back your $100, you're not entitled to it back. You just become a creditor. If they hold your assets, they do with bills, T-bills, treasury bills, then it's a legally different situation. They have to hold that asset on your behalf, and then need to, if they go to liquidation, those assets are ring-fenced, are returned to the holder of those assets. Now, if digital tokens were legally treated as similar assets, then I think that's a big sea change, both in terms of customer protection, but also in terms of the problem that governments have with too big to fail. You have a situation where banks can simply not be allowed to fail because of the impact on the investor, the retail community, and the business community. That ceases to be an issue if legally those assets belong. And so, if the bank fails, it's the credit of the bank that suffer, not the individuals who have bank accounts, not the business account holders. Which part was part of the question? I've just realised I haven't answered the whole question. So I think central bank tokens will sit alongside other cryptos. You've also got, where it's more of a threat, I think, is stablecoin. Stablecoin, it's interesting to see how much of a place there will be for stablecoins, which are essentially privately issued currency to all intents and purposes. And a big question mark over whether that will still be allowed to exist once government issued retail tokens are there. It is allowed to exist. How much appetite there'll be for it? Because all else being equal, if I'm holding dollars anyway and take the deflation, the inflation risk, then I would much rather it was something where I knew it was backed by the Federal Reserve than hope that somebody else had collateral to back it. But that's all else being equal, because something that stable coins give you that central bank tokens won't is their censorship. So I block moving my money into another account. Yeah, it's something that's in my control because I have the keys to my so that's the only noticeable difference between the two.
There are now 2 countries in the world, albeit I want to say in the developing, that have adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. This is the Central African Republic has joined El Salvador. But now we have a situation with the UK's new Prime Minister. Will Rishi Sunak's attitude towards crypto shape Britain's position in the crypto market? How will it shape Britain's position in the crypto market?
So I think there are 2 questions that you've asked there. The first is around adoption of Bitcoin as a reserve currency, which have the example of El Salvador is actually they've gone a step further. Not only is it a reserve currency for their central bank, it's also legal tender within the country. Now, as John Matonis has been saying for a large number of years, I mean, he's been involved in Bitcoin almost since the start, and as he said for a long time, when this starts adopted by central banks, it is likely to be the smaller central banks that adopt this. And he had very good reason for that. You know, a lot of these central banks actually don't. Their currency is, to all intents and purposes, the US dollar. You know, they're dollar denominated. They don't have real control of their own supply, and so for them, for countries like that, there's real benefits to switching to Bitcoin as their central bank currency and their unit of legal tender, because it's independent from any government intervention. So that gives them a level of stability that simply can't be provided by using US dollars, where another central bank can print it or withdraw it and is in control of the interest rates. So he's always said it would be smaller countries adopt it first, then you'll get a cascade effect, because there'll be a lot of interest from people to hold their assets in digital currency, Bitcoin. So people will then open bank accounts, Bitcoin nominated, and it will draw money into that jurisdiction. Other countries will see that, they'll adopt it, and you'll get a cascading effect as bigger and bigger and bigger countries start to adopt, let's say, Bitcoin as the unit of legal tender and their reserve currency. I think it's a shame El Salvador have only gone halfway with this. They've made it very difficult for overseas individuals and companies to open up Bitcoin-denominated bank accounts. They've kept it very much a domestic phenomenon up till now. So I think they're not benefiting to the extent they could do, because they've done it in what is actually quite a expensive way. So that's the first question about Bitcoin as a central bank currency, reserve currency. Second question about Rishi Sunak and his attitude to Bitcoin. I think what we'll see there is the UK start to adopt more crypto-friendly policies in the same way that the US has done over the recent years, where the regulators work with the industry to come up with solutions that allow the banking industry to become actively involved. It used to be in the US was the hardest place to get set up a bank account if you're a cryptocurrency company. Now it's one of the easiest, because they have a clear regulatory framework. They know what they need to show, they know what they need to ask. As long as you've got this and this, that proves you're a good actor, you can get your bank account. And it's become very, very straightforward. The other problem that the UK has, and this is true of all the non-US jurisdictions, is, are they actually going to take a position where they protect companies in their jurisdiction? You've had a court case that the SEC have launched recently, where they're trying to say that any transaction on the Ether blockchain is governed by the SEC. They're trying to say it's a US jurisdiction, which essentially means any company that transacts business using Ether as its an Ether transaction or as a token to drive a smart contract is under US jurisdiction. If non-US central banks and regulators allow that to stand and provide some kind of protection to companies regulated in their jurisdiction so that they can't be targeted by the SEC for doing things that are completely legal within their jurisdiction with customers from their jurisdiction, companies will simply set up in the US. Why would you set up anywhere else? Because you've got to meet US regulatory requirements anyway. Why would I set a company up where I've got to meet US and UK or US and European regulations? You must set up in the US and you can operate globally. So, and it's clear that the US are following the same roadmap they use for the gambling industry. Online gambling, the largest online gambling company, brought it in the UK. And what the US did use their court system to take investors in gambling companies and participants in those companies, arrest them, target them as illegal actors, to close them down from operating in the US, and then they allowed safe harbor for their own company, set up online gambling that could operate legally. And now the largest online gambling companies are American, and they're following the same road with digital currencies and digital currency regulations. And the difference between gambling and digital currencies is digital currencies are seen as the biggest financial innovation that's come about in our generation. Now, the SEC has basically made intentions clear. They want that industry to operate within the US. And it's down to the non-US regulators and governments whether they're going to allow that to happen.
A lot of questions, a lot of similar questions around the NFT market, which right now is largely focused on being executed on the Ethereum blockchain. These regulations or these the case the U.S. government is trying to make on the Ethereum blockchain, would that follow through? Then they would set that up as a test case so that any blockchain that was vying with Ethereum blockchain for dominance, and what I'm talking about is Solana, Polkadot, Cardano.
So as I understand it, and I'm not a lawyer, but I understand it, the core of their claim is that these are proof of stake, which are the ETH is now proof of stake. The majority of stakeholders are US based, so there's more Ethereum staked within the US than anywhere else. Therefore, they have jurisdiction over. So any proof of stake network that has a majority of the staking done within the US, potentially, if they were successful in this legal, potentially would fall under the same area. So and would become US regulated. And by a similar analogy, if you had a majority in the EU, it would come under EU regulations. But I guess the big difference there is the US courts play extraterritorial jurisdiction in a way that European courts don't. So that's where or in my opinion, is such a problem non-US governments if they want to be taken seriously in the blockchain and crypto finance sphere.
It's very interesting because you and I have had conversations about this before, that the US government has a certain way of behaving that exists nowhere else, where they claim as you say, extraterritorial jurisdiction over business. It may not even touch its borders, but they claim jurisdiction over that business. Um, I know there are other things that are driving not just regulatory issues, but do you think that there are any tokens that may supplant Ethereum? And Ethereum is the blockchain, the token is Ether,
Yep.
but because of superior technology?
Okay, so most smart contract blockchains, not all, but most, they use the EVM. They use the Ethereum virtual machine. So any smart contract which works for Ether works on other blockchains, and vice versa. So I think ETH is in the same situation that Bitcoin's in. You may get some blockchains are a little bit faster, a little bit more efficient, do things slightly differently, have a slightly better proof of stake concept, maybe it's proof of work concept. But it's going to be very difficult to supplant ETH as the primary smart contract for big projects. The reason is, although transaction costs are high on ETH, even with going proof of stake, it's still high in the scheme of things. You know, people talk about its coming price. Yeah, it's come down to $3 a transaction. But if every transaction on a DeFi contract, or every transaction on a, especially on a game, costs $3 to do, that really is not feasible. It's not practical to do that on the blockchain. So the way they get is they have second layer L2 networks. And what these are similar to the Lightning Network on Bitcoin. It aggregates transactions, nets transactions off, and then just the net effect goes on to the ETH blockchain. And that's a good innovation for large contracts. The problem comes with new projects that start, new concepts. They don't have the liquidity you need for those L2 network to be able to use effectively. So you almost have a chicken and egg situation where you can't get the volume because it's too expensive. And without the volume, you can't lower the transaction fees. So I think those projects are going to move across to other blockchains. Other blockchains like Solana is one, which is Phantom. Blockchains that use the EVM, but much cheaper transaction costs, much quicker transaction speeds. So I think you'll see a migration from that perspective. The other area of innovation, which is slightly different, tokens like Cardano, which have taken a different architectural approach to their blockchain. They've put a lot of effort into layers of functionality, which makes it potentially much more flexible. With Ether, or with anything to EVM, to change anything, unless it's fairly minor, needs to change to the blockchain, to the nodes. With Cardano model, they've got different layers, so you can have innovations and additions added without necessarily changing the core code on the node itself. So it'll be interesting to see how, if smart contracts like that start to make headway once they're fully released. Obviously, at the moment, they're still a prototype and they're building their customer base. So, but it'll be interesting seeing as that gains traction, if the technical advantages that has outweigh the first mover advantage that ETH has and the volume of projects on there. I mean, I know you have a view on this, Marcy. What's your take on it?
Well, I think that the cost, I know that the cost to do transactions on the Ethereum blockchain are driving people into other areas. INEM is trying to establish, and sometimes these are, they're trying to establish in particular industries like Phantom, which is trying to establish itself as the gaming token of choice. So I think that it's going to be hard to drive business to other chains, but um, the efficiencies concerning cost and speed of transaction are going to make some of them viable. I actually wanted to go back to something you said about uh, I I wanted just really quickly because it's a question about something that you said before. Netting off transactions with to make things more efficient in Ether transactions and grouping them together. Does that effectively act as a mixer,
No,
as a mechanism?
no, because there's still clear there's still clear transaction.
But they're not. It's not on the blockchain. You said it's not on the blockchain.
But when you post, when you blockchain, full information is included. So it's like the Lightning Network. When you get a Bitcoin transaction, you see all of the transactions that make up that aggregated. Yeah, so it's just the gas fees are lower, and when you do the transaction, so you'll see a large. You wouldn't see offsetting. You're right. So if I sent you Bitcoin, you sent them back to me. Yes, you wouldn't see it. You wouldn't see it as a post. But it's not an effect mixer.
Oh, okay. And just so that people understand, mixed are these mechanisms whereby you have this perfect transaction history on a blockchain, so you can see back to the original transaction where the path of money as it flows. Mixers are these mechanisms where sometimes bad actors, some people who like their privacy, they put their transaction through a mixer. Uh, there's lots of other transactions in there as well, get all jumbled up. So even though NFTs really aren't a part of our proposition right now, we do have some very exciting NFT plans for the future of the Immerse game, and I cannot wait till we can start talking about those. But we get a lot of questions about the NFT market. And one of the questions is, what does it mean now for the NFT market? Now that Meta has included T functionality in I guess it must be in their virtual. I really don't know much about
I don't know much about it at all. I think as far as I'm aware, it's what Facebook are providing is the ability to share your NFTs to your friends. So the only way I can see that is maybe it's a way of linking into an NFT network and send an identifier so it can be displayed, and they provide the technical interface. But I'll be honest, I don't know much about what Facebook's plans are. But the fact that they're looking at it, I think, is encouraging for the market as a whole, because it's again it cements it it broadens the appeal. It broadens the appeal of NFTs because if it's something which can become a shared item that you can share around your social network, then that's got a good thing.
I will say that my orientation to this is around virtual reality because as part of my role, I do a lot of exploring various VR networks. Horizons, of course, is one that has a lot of traction simply because of its association with Facebook and the Oculus. And I will say that several of the more prominent networks like Spatial have NFT components both within their social network and within their functionality. So I help but think that it will broaden the appeal of NFTs, though personally NFTs kind of perplex me. Now we have 5 more minutes left, and there's 2 2 questions left on the list. So I'm gonna let you pick which one of these you answer, okay? And we will have our final discussion about that. The first question is there a relationship between Elon Musk's Twitter acquisition and the price of Doge, which jumped up last week? And why do you think this is the case? That's question number one. And question two, which veers off in an entirely different direction, is do play to earn cryptocurrency games yield actual spendable money? And how does that work?
Um, okay, I'm going to do the Elon Musk question because I think it's actually quite a quick question. I think the reason Doge was last week was actually some discussions around technical innovations that they were making. Some people talked about it being to do with Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, and you can see how that could potentially longer term be a Doge plus one. Everyone knows Elon Musk is very a big fan of Doge. He loves Doge. So I think the perception of holders is maybe in the same way he's on Twitter, they allow people to send NFTs via Twitter. Maybe one day they'll introduce a way to send Doge via Twitter. Where there'll be a lot of regulatory hurdles to overcome to do that, but it would be, you can see actually they're combining two of his interests, two of his past companies. Twitter that he now has, and PayPal, which is where he made his money to start with. You imagine a situation where you can pay for something via your Twitter account. Yeah, use it, and Doge is a native currency for that. So the transaction, I send to your verified Twitter account, and I've paid you, and it's as simple as that. So you can see a situation where that would appeal to him as a business model, and it would be good for Doge. Doge was the underlying rails that's for that transaction. So you can see a, albeit convoluted, set of circumstances where it's a positive for Doge. So that was the first question.
Yes.
Second question about
different area.
A different area completely. Play to earn. I think the big problem you have with a number of play to earn propositions is the underlying token isn't backed by anything. So issuing these tokens to the winners, the only way these winners can cash that in is to sell the token for another crypto, a stable coin or something like that. And it's what they're relying on, more and more demand for the game to fund those purchases. Without new money coming into the ecosystem, there's no way for people to cash out. And then the big question, and this is where there's a big disparity between different types of different projects within the space. Some projects fund these using advertising or funds that the game might be sold, or legitimate ways of bringing money into the ecosystem, which are then used to buy these tokens which have been sold as issued as prize. The other route is essentially makes it a Ponzi scheme, because you're relying on people buying the token to buy out the people who won the prizes. As it's like any scheme of that type. Once it reaches capacity, there's no one else left to buy the token. The only people left are the people trying to sell it, either because they bought it or because they've won it at a competition, and it comes collapsing down. So one of the things I would always look at when I'm looking at these games is, does it have an underlying economic rationale for it to be cashed in? You know, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But then don't assume that token's got any value. You're doing it just to play the game, which isn't a bad thing, but you're not. It's not a true play to earn. To be truly play to earn, there has to A, be a token that you can cash out on the crypto exchange, and B, an economic rationale that puts money to buy that token, which doesn't rely on investors or retail purchases of it.
Is that the underlying conditions that caused the precipitous rise and then fall of both Mana and Sand? And I think Axie Infinity had the same
My,
kind of trajectory.
Decentraland's a bit different. Decentraland, you are paying, excuse me, to participate in an infrastructure. Yeah? So it's perfect. That's a completely different proposition. You're buying land, you're buying a token to be part of this growing ecosystem, and actually the land you own and you're effectively buying an advertising opportunity. Pure and simple. You are buying this advertising space within this world, that's virtual world that you believe you can promote your product on, or you can hold and sell it to somebody else later to put their product on. So it's much like buying domain names. It's you're trying to secure an asset that you think will increase in value. That's very different to a proposition which is giving tokens at prices for people to cash in, but has no way to rest those tokens, the funds to buy those tokens. Decentraland is a quite a clever economic model, the way they've structured it, and very different.
So you think there's an opportunity because at the start for Decentraland, it's like goes up, comes off just as fast, and it's really.
That's also true of a number of second-tier tokenists in this bear market. If you look at any bear market, and this isn't just true of crypto, you look at stocks. The stocks that are almost worst aren't the blue chips. They're affected, but tends not to be the very small ones because there's not enough interest in them for them to be sold. It's those mid-tier companies or mid-tier cryptos that were starting to make headway, starting to get into mainstream. They're the ones that are going to be hit the worst. And you look at what happened in the dot-com bubble. Amazon collapsed. A lot of other Google collapsed. And subsequently gone on to reach new heights, and so I wouldn't read too much into whether it's done badly during the bear market. Much more important is how it performs when the market starts to rally again, whenever the market ends, because that was really the key to turn at the end of the 2019 bear market. You saw some of the ones that were hit would then start to rally again. Others just stayed in the doldrums, and that's it's then that you'll really be able to tell which tokens have got potentially long-term prospects, in my opinion.
So we now have in the metaverse space, we have this decentralized model, which is Decentraland, Sandbox, and they're underwritten by tokens. And you have Horizon, which is absolutely centralized and is Facebook's. Facebook owns it. Is there space in the ecosystem for both of those to exist? Because they seem diametrically opposed in their underlying principles.
I'm trying to think.
Because they're both doing the thing. It's just the underlying architecture is
different. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know which will prevail. It's I suspect that they will run side by side. I suspect that things like the Facebook metaverse, the space, which is the Microsoft metaverse, trying to think if Google have I don't think they do yet. I think what they will become like AOL back in the early internet days, which will I think I think they will change. I think they'll not forced by regulatory, forced by demand to open up the interfaces so that people can go in and leave. Its movement is changeable between various environments, and ideally identity is interchangeable by control by a third party, or Web3. I wouldn't be surprised if in a year's time you were able to use Web3 to log into Space VR, Horizons, and because I think they want to attract that community from the decentralized space. So I don't think they'll go the whole lot. Their assets are held in a decentralized manner. I think they still want proprietary control of the environment, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a halfway house where the identity of the person can move between these various metaverse environments.
Final question, and you may or may not know the answer to this, but with propositions like Decentraland, which are meant to be decentralized networks, that still has to exist on an architecture of servers. How do they manage that centralized authority controlling and maintaining that architecture?
Yeah, it's a bit of a misnomer to call decentralized land. Ownership is decentralized. So your ownership of a plot of land is decentralized. It's on the blockchain. You access it through Web3, and it can't be removed from you. So within it, some of those assets are blockchain based, so NFTs, and they again belong to those. But the UI, the display interface, is largely driven by a centralized process. Put it that way.
So servers are run by some central authority. It is not decentralized management of servers.
Provision of information, because if you imagine you've got all this information by the various holders, they're not running their servers 24/7 to run their building, to run their URL link, to run their metaverse environment. That's all running somewhere, and it's running on the blockchain. That's nothing on decentralized, centralized servers. So there are servers that are necessary to facilitate the operation of that decentralized ownership environment. So it's a decentralized ownership, not decentralized operation.
Well, this has been a fascinating set of questions and answers, and I hope you found it as interesting as I have in participating.
I think it's great having questions from the community, because it keeps me on my toes. they're always different, rather than having a subject that we're talking about today, which you kind of have to end up a bit about, so you know what to expect. So it's enjoyable. Thank you.
And I would like to say to anybody listening to us on the various social networks that these are posted, if you have any questions that you would like to have us address during one of these roundtables or during one of these Q&A sessions, please just forward them to questions@imers.land. And we possibly will include it in the next one of these sessions. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Marcy. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Gavin.